Welcome to the Good Grief Conversation. I'm your host, Janet Jones. This programme brings you honest, gritty, emotional and inspiring conversation around a subject that affects all of us, yet is still very much taboo. So join me now for this inspiring Good Grief Conversation. Lovely. Anita, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me here on the Good Grief Conversation. I was just speaking to Sarah there saying that I came across your website, Dying Matters, just by doing some Googling, and I thought, what your message is and what you're aiming to do is perfect for the Good Grief Conversation. So thanks for sparing the time. I would just want to give a little bit of background. I've got a question for both of you. First of all, Sarah, can you just say what brought you to doing this kind of work? Your passion, what was the thing that brought you to this kind of work?
So for me, and my experience when I was very young was of my grandmother caring for my grandfather towards the end of his life. And he unfortunately suffered a stroke. And so he was really needing all of the care that she was able to provide and that many other people supporting her were able to provide. And my grandfather also died in a hospice. And I think, that was sort of something that I remember as a young child witnessing. And my mother was also very poorly during her life and spent much of her time in hospital. So I was sort of also going into a hospital situation. I wanted to be a nurse. I trained as a nurse, worked as a nurse for many, many years, and worked with many health professionals who were, again, very, very passionate about having these conversations, but also about actually how can we enable people to have that best possible care towards the end of their lives. And actually, part of that being about being able to have those conversations. And so that, I think, is really what's brought me to the opportunity to take part in Dying Matters.
Yeah. Lovely. And Anita, same question to you. What was the passion and the purpose that brought you to working with Dying Matters?
My father-in-law died in a hospice, and it was the first time I'd ever been with anybody at the end of their life or had experienced anything to do with death. And I was very fortunate because that was in my late 40s. So I've come to this sort of experience very late in life, if you like. And I think when the opportunity came up to be able to look at how can we break down some of the stigma around talking about death, dying, and bereavement, this kind of opportunity to work on Dying Matters and work with Hospice UK was just extremely compelling. I was very fortunate. My father-in-law had a very peaceful and actually incredibly moving death. And it was nothing like I had thought it was going to be. I'm somebody that's really afraid of hospitals. I don't like anything medical. And this was a completely different situation. And I feel very, very fortunate that I've had that as my first experience of somebody dying.
Yeah, that's lovely. I do find that the more people I'm speaking to, it's because they've had an experience that brings them. It's not really a career choice when you leave school, for instance. It is life that brings you to this. So I noticed on your Dying Matters, your strapline is working to create an open culture that talks about death, dying, and bereavement. So, Anita, what are your thoughts on that? Can you expand on that message, really? And why is that important? Can't we just carry on and pretend that death doesn't actually really happen? And when it does, it's a tragedy that happens to other people.
Yeah, so what we know is that actually people see death as being very distant. It's something that does happen. It's something that happens to other people. It's something that actually is far away from us. But actually, the importance of us having these conversations and being prepared is so that we're able to live our lives well. We're able to live our lives to the full, but also knowing that our families and our loved ones are aware of what's important to us and what matters to us. And I think that's why, we absolutely have this vision of this open culture that enables us to be able to have those conversations. We see the distress caused to families and to people when actually their wishes are not understood or they're not known, and we don't share those conversations so that we're able to support people in the best way that we possibly can to live their lives well and to have those wishes respected towards the end of their lives and after they die. And we know, from our statistics, when we're actually looking at, how people have these conversations, that actually only 44% of the population have written a will, for example, and 22% of people, we know through our surveys, have expressed their wishes, which means that an awful lot of people still have not being able to have these conversations. It isn't felt perhaps to say to be important to them, is this vision of creating that space, that conversation, that time for people.
Great. I'm going to put that question to you, Sarah, as well. So we'll recap on the strapline. So it's working to create an open culture that talks about death, dying and bereavement. Why is that important to you?
I think it's just really important that we start to break down some of the stigma. I often look at where we've got to as a society with our conversations around mental health. And I think we've moved massively, particularly in the last couple of years. And I think that death, dying and bereavement is the next big stigma that we as a society need to tackle. We are seeing a lot of people struggling alone because people don't know what to say to somebody that's just been bereaved, for example. It's that awkward moment of like, your heart goes out to them, but how do you respond to this person that you might not know terribly well? And even if you do know well, are you going to make them even more upset than they were before? And so Dying Matters is very much about giving people that practical information too. It's about providing people with guidance on how to listen to people, what questions to ask, what can you do just to make this a little bit more normal? Because at the end of the day, every single one of us is going to die. And, we can help our loved ones by talking about it. And when you die well, you leave something very positive, I think, behind. You kind of have a sense maybe of peace and closure, that you know your loved one and you know their wishes and you know what they wanted. And you were able as a person to help fulfill some of that. And I think that's a really important way to enable the rest of us to grieve well, as well as to die well. That makes sense.
Yeah, and also I think when you live well, you die well. Living and dying, they are part of the same thing. And from what I see is that the fear of dying, the fear of speaking to somebody about dying. I have a friend of mine, her mum is 97, but nobody talks about dying to her, and she doesn't talk to them about it. But it's just like, oh my God, this is the elephant in the room. How do you wrap that up so that you can have a peaceful death? Because it's a bookend, isn't it? You've got birth and you've got death, and they bookend us. So we need to talk some more about this conversation. So let's move on to some experiences, work-wise that you've had when people have come to you, the things that you've seen with your work. Anita, you've done a lot of end-of-life work. So what kind of things have you found? What are people like? And how have you turned people maybe from their fear into feeling peaceful before they die? That sort of thing. I'm new. I don't understand any of this.
Yeah, I think it is a very personal, a very individual thing. And I think, it's very much about understanding what matters most to that person. So I think, when actually we're starting to have those conversations or having those conversations with someone, and I'm thinking about particular individuals, and everybody's individuals. So for me, very much about understanding what matters and understanding what's important to that person, but also about their lives, actually what, their lives are. And I think also very often, that fear is as well being able to listen very carefully to what it is that fear that person may have. Because, that may be lots of different things that person is concerned about. They may be concerned about the treatment that they're receiving. They may be concerned about if they have any discomfort. They may be concerned about how, or the process of dying. And often the fear is, it's about, well, actually, what will it be like when I die? Who will care for my loved ones? Who will be there, for my wife, my husband? How will that happen? So I think it's very much that listening. It's very much that person, that individual, their lives and their particular fears. And I think also, that response is that kind response, that tender conversation. It's about, I think, also not all of that information being given to someone at the same time. It's important that actually it's ongoing dialogue, it's an ongoing conversation, that you're able to support someone with just what their particular concerns are. I think sometimes it is just the fear of saying things out loud for people, being able to say what it is and then to be able to have that conversation. And it can make so much difference. Some people it is, well, I'm fearful about what's going to happen at home, what's going to happen to my children, what's going to happen to my dog. So many different things that people are fearful of. But I think in my clinical experience, it is often that final moment about how will I die that people are concerned about, and as Sarah, as you were saying, that expectation about how somebody dies, because it's something that as a society we're not very familiar with. Not many of us as adults have been with somebody approaching death, and even fewer being with someone when they've actually died, to know what that's like. So I think, that is a fear that people have when they're dying. And so being able to talk about that and share, that with families and with the people that are close to them is really important. And then I think, what I have found is that when we've been able to do that, when you've been able to get beyond that, then it's actually about making the most of whatever is happening at that time around that person, making sure that actually what matters to them. Again, I can think of many examples where rooms have been filled with wonderful photographs of families, of children, where we've brought animals into someone's room, parties where, again, many hospices who will arrange weddings. And I think that comes once some of that fear has been able to be supported and helped, really.
Yeah, reducing the fear allows you to open up to that joy, doesn't it? Open up to that experience. In a way, the fear will push it away. No, that's true. And so, Sarah, what are your thoughts on that and your experiences?
Well, it's really interesting, actually, is the fact that when you do this sort of research with the general public and you ask them what their views are and their perspectives are, many people would actually feel more comfortable talking about death, dying and grief than you would expect. So we have about 70+% of people say, yeah, it's fine, I'd be happy to talk about it. But they don't like to talk about it because they worry that they're going to upset people. So I think we have this real interesting challenge to get over, which is our own personal fear of actually bringing up the subject, actually starting that conversation. And Anita's talked about that from a healthcare professional perspective, but I think there's also that fear from being with a loved one. You don't want to upset them by talking about the fact that they're not going to be living for very much longer. So how do you start that sort of a conversation? And we know that, again, from research, that death is uncomfortable. People think about it as something that's happening over there down the track. Even your example of that lovely 90-plus-year-old lady, it's not going to happen to me. Why would it happen to me? And yet, actually, we have a deep-rooted fear of our wishes being ignored. And we need to make sure that we start exploring some of those conversations. So I started talking to my parents about this, what do you want for your funeral? And it feels very uncomfortable to begin with. But actually, I'm so glad that I'm having those conversations now, because I feel like I can honor them actually when the time comes, rather than run around at one of the most distressing times in your life, wondering what they might have wanted. And I think we're seeing with COVID particularly an opportunity for people to start talking about these issues far more than they perhaps would have done. We are seeing, a real uptick in people saying, yes, I'm going to do something. I'm going to write my will. I'm going to put an end of life care plan in place. And that's really been quite a noticeable difference.
Yes. Don't you think it's sad at the moment, though? Because people who, like, for instance, my kids, they know how I want mine to be. They know that I want a disco and 80s music, and they just know that. So they don't have to worry about that. I do need to do a will, though. I'm sitting here and I'm cringing as you give me those statistics, and it's like, yes, I am one of those statistics. But I think that's great, and it's all about celebrating life. But during COVID, how do you celebrate someone's life? If I died today, I can't have my disco with my 80s music, except I could on Zoom, but that's not the same, is it? So what on earth do people do now? Have you come across any quirky things that people are doing, or have you any suggestions and ideas for people?
Well, yeah, it's really heartbreaking, actually. We're hearing more stories about people who are suffering more because they can't be with their loved ones at the end of their lives than not. And I think, we need to be able to talk a bit more about the kind of long-term effects of what that might mean for us as a society with traumatic death and complicated death, and how that kind of works out in bereavement will become a feature we need to be very aware of. And we need to be able to put those sorts of places and spaces for people to be able to share their grief, because they may not be able to do that right now. They may not be able to be with their loved one and see them depart, as it were. And I just think that's really, really hard. And it means that peace will displace what they would normally be feeling. And that's likely to come out further down the track, because none of us can avoid the bereavement process. It's a very normal, natural human thing, isn't it? And I think so. We've seen people attend funerals if they can. It's very limited. We've seen people attend on Zoom. So some funerals have been kind of broadcast, and people have been able to take part in Zoom at the same time as some people have been in the crematorium or the church or the mosque. So that's fine, but it's not the same. Anita, I think you'd probably be able to give a very clear idea of what that might mean.
Because the wake is also an important part too, isn't it? Once you've done the saying goodbye, then you move into celebration. There's a mismatch. Could you share some of your experiences then, Anita?
Yeah, it is absolutely heartbreaking, I think, to hear the stories. Some hospices celebrating, sort of have that kind of ceremony of celebration, which again isn't the same, but I think it is about actually honouring and remembering. So some of it is about how do we find ways to remember memories. And I think, there are examples where people are thinking about that ahead, about, well, what are the memories that we would like to make and to remember this person by, and, carefully doing some of that work. Because as you say, actually, if we're not able to attend a funeral, then further down the line, how do we express this grief? And I think the other thing that we have seen during the COVID pandemic is where communities have really come together to support people, to support vulnerable people, but equally to support people who've been bereaved after a death. Because although we're not able to be at a funeral together with many people, again, we've seen that sort of compassionate community. And I think building those compassionate communities as we go forward is an important part of enabling people to have support for the longer term, really, and finding those opportunities. You're absolutely right, Sarah. I think that complicated grief that can come from this traumatic event of not being able to attend a funeral will be with someone and can be with someone for a long time. So I think it's a number of different things. But if I also think about people returning to work, there's someone returning to work after they've lost a loved one, how are our workspaces compassionate? How are we enabling flexible working? How are we checking in with people? I think that's also a really important part of supporting people as we go forwards, particularly if we haven't been able to attend funerals in the same way. So thinking about compassionate communities and compassionate employers, actually our organisations that people work in, tuned into this. And I think actually also being able to make people aware of the services that are available. So the confidential support lines that people can have access to are really, really important. So I think, that at this time, nobody wants to give people lots and lots of information, but I think the importance of making sure those things are available and that we are checking in with people is really important to support that.
So Imogen, Dying Matters is about to do a really important campaign. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So as we approach the end of October and start of November, it comes to a time when there are lots of different cultures and faiths around the world that have ways of remembering the dead around this time. So they're all different. We have Halloween, we have Samhain, we have All Souls Day, we've got Mexico's Day of the Dead. So Dying Matters is running a campaign called I Remember, and it's thinking about grief as a natural response, losing someone you love and cherish, and also the idea of loss and memory, and it it being both normal and healthy to discuss the dead and to remember people that we've lost, and to also support each other through the emotions that these memories trigger. So from Monday next week, that's the 26th of October, till the following Sunday, the 1st of November, we'll be sharing stories online and speaking to lots of different people about memories, about little things that remind them of people that they've lost. So it can be things like songs, places, a particular hot sauce that they always put on their food. Just the idea of triggering that conversation about people and memory that we wouldn't usually be comfortable talking about.
And I guess any wisdom that they've shared, you know, people come into our lives and they bring so much. And so it's nice to share the wisdom and the stories. Because I know when I lost my son, the very first thing I just thought, oh my God, nobody is going to ask how he's doing. And I don't have any more stories to share. I have nothing new. You know, I've no new photos, anything. And so I think that this I Remember is such a lovely opportunity for people to bring their loved ones back to life in the general public, you know, which I think is really great. So how do people get involved in that?
So all they have to do is share a memory. It can be a photo, it can be a video, it can just be some text if they would like. And they share it on social media, so Facebook, Twitter or Instagram, tagging at Dying Matters and using the hashtag I Remember. And we'll be sharing those stories. They can also get in touch with Dying Matters directly through the website. We'll be running that all through the week. And also, as part of Dying Matters, the overall campaign, this is really the first step in becoming better informed about death, dying and grief, and being able to support people who are grieving. So we'll also be asking people to join Dying Matters. So there'll be an opportunity on our social channels and on our website to sign up and become part of this movement to open up the conversation around death and dying.
Brilliant. Superb. And so I'm going to put this out to both you, Sarah and Anita. So this is the first time I've done a call where I've had multiple people. Because we're not all in the same room, it gets a little bit tricky. So let's start with Sarah. This is actually a really important thing to do, isn't it? To remember. And I think as time goes on for a bereaved person, then you feel the people around you, there's not really much more that you can say to them. And I am speaking from personal stuff at the moment. I have close friends and family who say, no, we'll always talk about him. So how can this help people who are in that position where maybe somebody died a few years ago and you feel like it's gone silent now? So why is this important to do the I Remember? How can it help?
I think it's about honouring people that you love, isn't it? Those memories never go away. And you mentioned before about bringing those people into your daily lives and sharing what those memories are. I think it's something that enables us to connect as human beings. You know, we all experience a loss somewhere along the line in our lives, some more than others, you know, and some are more tragic and unexpected than others, but we all experience loss. And I think there's something very bonding about being able to share what those people were to you, how important they were, and bringing them a bit back to life. And who knows what that might then prompt another conversation about them where people haven't mentioned them for ages. And I think so we did a research a few years back where we know like 68% of people want to leave happy memories for their friends and family after they die. So if they want to leave those happy memories, then shouldn't we be celebrating those memories and acknowledging that, you know, into the future? We did this last year and we had an amazing response. And I remembered my grandfather who died when I was like 16, and he was the most incredible man. I haven't, thought about him in decades, but he shaped who I am as a person, and I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that he did. And I think that's really special for people.
Absolutely. And I love this I Remember, because that gives you the opportunity to share, the memory of your grandfather with more people, which will then trigger other people to think about their grandfathers. I am now thinking of my grandfather, which was my mum's dad. And when I was a little girl, he always used to make jelly in a cup just for me, right? And as soon as I go running into his little house, out came the jelly in the cup. He also used to do, the processed peas that you can get, but he used to boil them to death and they got full of shells.
Disgusting.
Nice memory and a not so nice memory on that one. But no, I think behind the stories are that person loved you. It's spreading the love, isn't it? And turning pain into love. So what do you think then, Anita, about, how does it help people? Because grief, it has a life of its own. Bereavement isn't easy. I do this program and I'm sure people think, oh, she's handled this really well. Well, trust me, there are days I don't. What are your thoughts on how this can help in that grieving process?
Yeah, I think it's the connections, and I think it is about remembering those people, and that actually it does shape your life, and it becomes a new life story. And actually, it's so important that that's part of your life story, I think. And I remember can really help to support that. I think last year when I remember was happening. And seeing, people talking about their loved ones, I think as well, by enabling that to happen, more people can see that this is something which is part of life. It's part of humanity. We celebrate the birth of a child, and everybody, will celebrate birthdays, but actually celebrating when we've lost someone and remembering that person and honouring that person's life is so important. And I was thinking, as I was preparing for talking to you today about my grandmother, and something that was really sticking with me about her life, and about how she was always surrounded by lots and lots of people. She then cared for my grandfather until he died, and her world became for a while quite small, but then it opened up again. And I've just got, this kind of memory of that, and of that, the person that she was, but also that she'd lived her life within the circumference of 30 miles from where she was born all her life, and just thinking of how life has changed and society's changed. And so I think I remember just enable so many facets to just be shared, and as we go on, that it becomes part of our lives, really.
Great. Yeah. Sarah?
We talked earlier in our conversation about, how hard it is for people during COVID not to be with the ones that they love, and they can't say goodbye necessarily, or they can't gather. And I think whilst this isn't in any way, shape or form something that can make up for that, what we hope is it's also a rallying point for people to be able to acknowledge that they may have lost somebody during this period of COVID. They don't need to have died from COVID symptoms, because we know that a lot of people have died at home who haven't been in hospitals. We've seen an increase in that taking place. And I think that there's something about this sort of wonderful opportunity that social media offers for us to be a little bit anonymized if we don't want to be too known. And I think it also enables us, hopefully, to then have further conversations with each other. Grief doesn't stop, does it? You know that. It just carries on, and you learn to live with it. But I think it opens up an opportunity for people to say, maybe invite you to a social activity, or to be able to, talk about this again when they haven't been able to, or found a convenient moment to check in with somebody that you care about that's maybe grieving for somebody. And I think hopefully I remember is a way of being able to get people to talk and to listen again, because that's so important.
Yeah. And I think, just thinking about that, it gives you the opportunity to see that we're all the same, because grief is lonely, you're isolated with it, but that's because it's unique to you. But that doesn't mean you're the only one feeling this way. And so I think the I Remember campaign will help with that. And it will also help to see the love behind those relationships that you are shared in stories and images and poetry, whatever gets shared on. Now, I've lost quite a few people. It's my mum, my dad, my grandparents, my son now. And I say, right, well, I'll just post about all of them. Because why not, My mum passed away pre the Good Grief conversation. I was a speaker, and my subject was happiness. So I was a motivational speaker. And it was my very first motivational event, and my mum passed away that night. And I still went ahead and did it. And actually talking about, right at the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about the fear around death. And it was my daughter who had to tell me. And she said to me, Mum, Grandma's had a heart attack. So I was like, well, okay, we'll carry on, and then we'll get to the hospital as soon as we can. And she was quite surprised at my reaction, and my room was filling up, and I was thinking, well, I can't do anything, and I'm sure Mum is in safe hands. And then my sister rang me, and she said, has Iona told you about Mum? I said, yes, she has. She went, did she tell you she'd died? She didn't tell me that bit. And then when I spoke to my daughter, she said, I was so afraid to say the D word, Mum. I thought you would understand if I said she'd had a heart attack, you would know she's died. But it's like, no, because people recover from heart attacks. And so there is the fear around saying death, dying. So I would like to see us open up on this conversation and to recognise that it is part of living, whatever age the death comes to, because, death doesn't care how old you are or how rich you are. But I do think we should embrace it. Ladies, I have loved this conversation. It's been so nice, and I'll certainly be supporting your I Remember. I'm going to put links out. We've got the Good Grief Conversation Facebook, so if you'd all like to come along and join me over there, and we can support the I Remember hashtag on there as well. But superb. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. Thank you, Sarah. All right. And thank you, Imogen, for organising all of this.
Thank you, Imogen.
Thanks, everyone.
Catch up with you soon. Bye now.
Take care. Bye-bye, Janet.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Well, I knew that was going to be a very interesting conversation. It was intelligent, it was informative, and it was very heartwarming too. What great people. So just to recap on what Imogen was saying about the I Remember and the importance of remembering our loved ones. Around the world, different cultures and faiths have ways to remember the dead. At the end of October and the start of November, we have Halloween, Samhain, but then there's All Souls Day and Mexico's Day of the Dead. And they're all different, but all with the roots in remembrance and the importance of not forgetting those we knew. Grief is a natural response to losing someone you love and cherish, and there's no right or wrong way to grieve, and everyone experiences it differently. But grief can never be fixed, diminished, or taken away. It becomes part of our life story, and it shapes how we live the rest of our lives. Now, COVID-19 has forced us to reassess our relationship to death and grief. It's strange. I mean, it's kind of brought us globally face to face with this. And that you hear all the time, people reevaluating their life. And I believe that that's because it's been brought up so close to us. Now, it's both healthy and normal to discuss the dead, to remember people we have lost, and to support each other through the emotions of these memories triggered. Now, from songs to places to a particular hot sauce that they've always liked on their food. Now, sharing stories is a way to keep memories of loved ones alive, and that's what they're doing over at Dying Matters. So don't forget, use the hashtag I Remember and attach them into it if you put @DyingMatters, and that will come up on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I've already done that a couple of times, and I've had a few of my loved ones now who have passed away, so I'm definitely going to be sharing a lot more memories. You can also connect with us over on Facebook. I have a page over there for the Good Grief Conversation, so if you just search The Good Grief Conversation, our page will come up. You can like us, you can follow us, and of course you'll get lots of information on there. You'll also be able to connect with me via there too. And we're on Twitter. Now, the strange thing is about Twitter, they never give me enough characters to actually get my full name. So you might want to write this down. It is @GoodGriefConvo. I mean, it's so funny, isn't it? Why can't they give us some more characters, eh? But that's what it is on Twitter, @GoodGriefConvo. You can find us there. And we're on Instagram @TheGoodGriefConversation. It would be great to connect with you too. Now, as always, I ask my guests to give a gift for you in our podcast extras. If you haven't discovered podcast extras yet, then head over to www.thegoodgriefconversation.com and just scroll down. You'll find podcast extras. You can click on that. They are completely free. Or you can also help and support this conversation by a small donation, and you can find out more about that when you head over there. But there really are now some amazing gifts in there. It's quite a resource. notes. What Dying Matters have offered are some PDFs. One is supporting bereavement. So if there are people in your life who are bereaved at the moment and they are in that phase of grief, then this document will help you to understand how to support somebody who is in the bereavement stage. And also there's another document talking about dying, and this is important so that people get their wishes. However, it's a really difficult conversation. And it's a really difficult one to approach. So this document will help you with how to handle things like that. So 2 really valuable resources, and I'm sure that they will serve you very well. So just head over to thegoodgriefconversation.com and sign up for podcast extras, and they will be there for you. So once again, thank you so much for tuning into the Good Grief Conversation, and a really special thank you to my guests today for giving their time. Time is a very valuable resource, so I truly appreciate that. This is the Good Grief Conversation, the conversation that no one wants but everyone needs. I'm your host, Janet Jones, and it is always my pleasure to bring you these inspiring, heartwarming conversations to help you rise again in difficult times. Until next week, stay safe, keep going with your life journey, and I will be with you again really soon. You take care now. Bye.